Publishing Rodeo, we're just going to introduce ourselves and explain why we're here, which is to shed light, promote transparency, and help authors advocate. There is a lot to learn about this industry and a lot that doesn't make sense. We can't claim to be experts, but we can give the author perspective from two very different sides of the coin and bring in people who do know a little bit more to talk about their experiences as well. So I'm going to start by allowing Scott to introduce himself.
Oh, I shouldn't be first, but I'll go anyway.
Ladies
So I'm.
first.
Thanks for that. Uh, I'm Scott Drakeford. I have just one book out right now, Rise of the Mages from Tor Books. That's all you really need to know about me at this point. I think we'll get into the whole story and the whole spiel, but long story short, I write tech heavy fantasy. Going to be getting into some historical fiction and other things, but fantasy right now.
And I'm Sunyi. My bio is kind of the same bland bio everywhere, which is that I grew up in Hong Kong but was born in Texas, or the other way around or something. And I now live in the UK, and I used to want to write epic fantasy, and now I've ended up writing some kind of weird mashup urban fantasy contemporary stuff with Tor. I have The Book Eaters, which came out in August 2022, and an untitled book, which nobody can think of a title for. And we are both Tor authors. We're both 2022 debuts. And that's how we kind of met and got started on this. Yeah, so I guess when I was thinking about this podcast, we'd been talking about it for over a year. I had this idea to do a writing podcast that's maybe a little bit like Print Run or podcasts like that talk about publishing, not craft, although craft does get discussed sometimes because we can't stay away from it. But yeah, honestly, we're writers and we're looking at writing as a career. So if you're here to kind of make trade publishing work for you, and you don't know how, which is difficult because there's not a lot of information floating around, we can talk about that. There's no formula for success, but there are common ground experiences that people go through, common pitfalls, common things to worry about, especially in your contract. And I guess go over the good and the bad and the bloody ugly. There is some
Yeah.
good, but there's a lot of bad and a lot more ugly. Um,
Well, just the scarcity of information and
yeah,
the bad information that circulates even among people that are theoretically in the know, right?
yeah,
Um, I've been in the industry, quote unquote, since like 2015, but it's really only been since meeting you, talking with you, and the other authors that have kind of gathered around
mm,
you. I mean, and a few other authors here and there before that, but
mm,
um, yeah, if you don't have some sort of in group, you really don't have a good understanding of what publishing really looks like, and where you really stand in that landscape. So I do think
mm.
that, be it good or bad, the info we have to share is going to be helpful for somebody, right? Because
Yeah.
you shouldn't have to fumble around for 10 years to even understand what kind of industry you're in.
Yeah, and the crazy thing to me is it's at every level. So when you're querying, there's all kinds of things like what's the etiquette for approaching agents, for chasing things you don't know. No one tells you. You're just kind of expected to figure it out. You go on submission. What's the etiquette for that? What's going on behind closed doors? Why does it take 8 months for someone to read a picture book? Um, mysteries of that nature. Why did that book get this amount of money? Why did my book get less or more or whatever? Um, and just really basic things where it's like this year for me has been eye-opening in terms of how lists work, how sales work. The fact that so many of us kind of go into launch day not even knowing our print run, not having
Yeah.
an idea of how many books we need to sell to earn out, and it's just kind of crazy to me. So uh, I mean, I'm gonna, I guess, start from the point of view of trad versus indie very, very quickly. Why did I choose trad? Because the whole rest of this podcast is going to be a lot of stuff that will be have people listening and going, "Why are you doing this again?" Um, Everyone's got different reasons. For me, like indie does need money to make money, and that was my goal, was to have a career with books. I don't know how you felt about it if you looked into it, but basically, when I was doing the research, it was like the state of the market for the indies at the moment is you need money for editing covers and advertising at a minimum, and you need to write fast. You need to write in certain genres to increase your chances of success, and it takes a long time. And submission was free, discounting the emotional cost and trauma, and um, getting published is largely free. Aside from, you're not having to lay out money or take financial risk. So, did you look into
Yeah,
the
and I
indie route
mean,
at all?
yeah, that's a big deal. The financial side for me, indie just wasn't something I was really familiar with. Right, I started
Mm.
writing in 2012, and I began looking for an agent in 2013. So I was already researching agents and how that world worked. All the books that I had read up to that point were trad books.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, if I'm being honest, part of it was ego and, wanting that stamp of approval, um, wanting to be part of that group of authors that I had read and admired and all of that. From the financial side and, purely business side, um, trying to get attention in a very crowded space, which indie is, right, is my absolute nightmare, right?
And I think the thing I would stress, I guess, before I get myself lynched on Twitter is that I'm not making a judgment on different publishing paths. That the publishing path that works for you is the one that's right. But um, you being general you to the whole world, um, but definitely like the challenges I'm most familiar with are trade. And yeah, when I talk about, I guess, when I talk about publishing and career things on the rest of this podcast, I'm really talking about a book deal with a publisher that can give you mass market distribution. And that's the kind of career path, and that's the kind of problems that we look at. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean
I guess
that's our expertise, right? Like for
yeah.
those listening wondering what you're going to get out of this podcast, Sunyi writes amazing books, and she also secured a relatively good um, debut deal, and she has a lot of contacts in the industry, more than anybody I know of at her stage in publishing. And she's taken the time to learn from a whole bunch of different people and areas of the industry. And I, in particular, have learned a bunch from her and from the writing group she pulled me into. My function on this podcast is mostly just to be a truth teller.
No, I mean that's very important because I think we're kind of getting into the meat of why the podcast exists if people haven't gotten bored at this stage. But it's effectively that at its heart, publishing is very unfair. And I was explaining this as a kind of metaphor to my partner earlier. It's like, if you want a job in a regular industry, you might go to this big corporation and send in an application, and you come in at the lowest level and you work your way up, and it makes sense, and there's progression. You know what you're getting paid, you know what happens at every level. And publishing, the equivalent is like, you want a job in this building, so you send in a general application, and you don't get to pick what position you'll be in. And you have to wait by the door for a long time, and maybe no one will answer, maybe they will. And maybe when they answer, they'll say, well, congratulations, your job is to be our company doormat. Or maybe they'll say, your job is to be our company CEO. And you will go like, that would be ludicrous as a model, but that is a bit what publishing feels like. You query, you get an agent, you go on submission. You don't actually know how well your book will do until it gets picked up. And when it gets picked up, it's like its fate is almost decided. I mean, it's not that rock solid. There are books that get picked up for nothing and do well, and there are books that get picked up for a lot and they bomb, and there's both ends of the extreme. But generally, publishing has a very tiered structure where, yeah, it's like applying for a job in a big corporate building and you just get a job that kind of defines your career right out the gate almost. That's what
Yeah.
it feels like from our end. And
Yeah.
this might be a good point for you to start talking about your publishing journey actually and what that was like.
You want me to go first again, huh? Um, yeah, just a quick comment. I definitely agree. That tiered nature of trade publishing and where you might fit in with other books being acquired, debut or otherwise, I didn't feel was all that well known, and I still don't think it is outside of certain circles, right?
Mm.
Um, I mean, I think even I myself didn't really know the difference between a lead title and a non-lead, and whether there were any other tiers besides that.
I think people
Um,
don't want to believe it actually. Like I've had this
yeah,
conversation with authors and they hear that and then they turn around and they go, "Well, no, that won't be me. I'm going to try and work really hard and like kind of overcome this." And it's like, but it's not really your thing to overcome. Like,
yeah, yeah.
you
You
know,
you
I
really do
think
lock. Yeah, you lock yourself in, and when people say, "Oh, well, you give up control to big publishers when you sign a contract with them,"
mm,
I was one of those that thought I'll make my own success regardless, right? But what you don't realize is that the factors that can actually affect success, or at the very least reach to give you a chance of success, they don't belong to you anymore once you sign that contract, right? Um, Everybody mentions, the obvious things like, oh, you give up control on your title, on your cover. Maybe you'll have to change certain things about your book to make your editor happy. That kind of thing is always mentioned when the issue of ceding control comes up, but it's
mm,
never a matter of, oh, you aren't going to decide, whether they send out promotional material for your book, whether they send your book to booksellers and influencers at all, that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, I definitely, back when I signed my deal in 2017, was in that camp of not really knowing what it meant to be signing the deal that I was, right? And that's why I think it's pretty important to, or at least useful. I mean, if I were a prospective author, I'd be gobbling up everything that we have planned to say on this podcast. So I hope it's useful to somebody. But yeah, I mean, I guess do you want me to just go through a brief overview of what my start to finish, or start
yeah,
to
go
now,
for
I
it.
guess, journey looked
Get,
like? So yeah, my my journey wasn't so different from, maybe a lot that you read about, but in 2012 I had just graduated with an engineering degree, though I had been working full time as an engineer for 2 years, 3 years at that point, enough to know I didn't want to do it anymore. And so I thought, okay, what am I going to do that I would really enjoy, feel like I'm making a difference in the world, all of that naive stuff, right? So I've always loved reading, and I've loved reading fantasy in particular. Fantasy is what turned me into a reader, and so I thought, okay, I'll give writing a shot because it seems more accessible than a lot of other things. Starting a business, whatever else I had floating through my head at the time. So I started writing in 2012, and I started with Rise of the Mages. Rise of the Mages is the first book I've ever written, and ended up getting it published. At that time, I called it Ire. That was the working title for many, many years. In 2013, I began researching agents, tried to decide, what agent I wanted. For me, as mentioned, indie versus trade publishing wasn't much of an internal debate for me, because to me, publishing was trade publishing, at least at that point in 2013. I'm sure people were making a lot of money in indie back then, and it was definitely a thing, but it certainly wasn't on my radar as something I necessarily wanted to do, right?
Mm.
So 2013, I narrowed my target agents down to three, mostly just based on books that I had read and liked. And you're going to hate me a little bit for this, but I decided that because, Sanderson, Jim Butcher, and Rothfuss were three of the more successful authors I knew of at that point, right? And that through my very limited reading circle, that was mostly my dad, had been introduced to and read and really liked. Those were three agents. Their agents were three that I wouldn't mind being represented by and really liked based on what I could find online, which wasn't a lot, honestly. So, also in 2013, I found out that two of those three agents would be at a convention in England, in Brighton, England, at World Fantasy Convention. And my wife's family is from England. Well, my wife's mom's family is from England. And so her grandmother and aunt and uncle and cousins all live in just south of London. So we decided to fly out, and I met them for the first time. Kaylee, my wife, hadn't seen them for a long time, and I got to spend 3-4 days down in Brighton and stalked my prospective agents. So, of those two agents that were there that I talked to very briefly, I was super awkward. I was very, very nervous. Um, but of the two I talked to at that convention, I really liked Matt Bialer, who is my current agent, and was really impressed with, just how he handled himself. He was very, very kind, even to an awkward guy approaching him, asking if I asked him if I could send him my unfinished manuscript when I had it done. He gave me his card with his personal email, which I think helped a lot. I didn't just go into his assistant's slush pile. I went straight to him. It took me, I thought I was almost done. I thought I was going to send it by the end of that year. It took me until the beginning of 2015 to finish the manuscript, edit it, revise it, many, many times until I was satisfied with it. I queried Matt with an exclusive query because I decided, that I'd rather have one of the top agents than just an agent. So my plan was to go one by one with, at the very least, the top 3 to 5 agents I had picked out. And Matt was my top choice, so I queried him first. It actually took a bit. So his website said, if you don't hear from me in 8 weeks, that's usually my reading period. So just consider it a no if you haven't heard from me. At 8 weeks, I decided I was going to follow up and just said, hey, we met at World Fantasy Convention. You said I should send it to you here. I hope you got it and had a chance to read. But if you did read it and have any interest, I'm about to send to other agents. So just let me know if you just need a little more time. And he responded and said, I do need a little more time. I remember you. I like what I've read so far. Just give me a few more weeks. Then a few more weeks passed, and he emailed offering rep. And this again was in 2015, and I thought I had it made. Right, like I thought I was in. It was done. I was going to be an author. Like I was counting down my corporate career already. Didn't quite work that way. It took until 2017 to my mistake, 2016 to be ready for sub. So Matt's a very editorial agent, and he's had a few different assistants in the time I've worked with him, but they've all been very, very good in terms of editorial input as well. So I worked with them on getting the manuscript ready for sub. We subbed, got 3, very nice actually, got 3 rejections out of the 9 I think we subbed to. We decided to pull the submission to publishers. which basically just means your agent sends another email saying, "Hey, we're pulling this to work on some things, and we'll go back out with it in a bit." So we pulled the sub in late 2016, I think, um, and I started revising based on some feedback from those three editors who had said no, but were kind enough to send. Two of them, in fact, sent like big letters of here's what I liked, what I didn't like, which was really cool. So we went back out okay. So right after we pulled the sub, an editor from Orbit, Kelly something, I should have looked that name up. But she emailed Matt and said, "Hey, I liked this. When you're done with those revisions, send it back to me." I was revising as quickly as I could, but before I could get the revision done, she left the industry, which is a thing that happens more often than I thought it might, with editors and agents.
Sorry, and I shouldn't laugh, but it's you have to laugh because it's bleakly funny.
Yeah, yeah, it happens a lot in this industry, and I didn't realize at the time. But so I was obviously devastated because that was the only, up to that point, the only interested editor in my book that I had at that point been working on for like 5 years, right? But come to find out, Davy Pillai, and please God, let me be saying that right. She had been, in some leadership position at Orbit, and she was somehow involved with uh, Kelly, or this editor who had liked the book, but had then left the industry. And she was aware of my book and liked it. And so my agent, being the excellent person he is, talked to Davey about it personally, at least as far as I understand. And then we gave Davey, who had just joined Tor, she had just jumped from Orbit to Tor to be, yeah, I don't remember what her initial title was, executive director or something, and I think she's now the president.
She's the
None of
head honcho,
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
whatever that phrase is now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she was one of the top leaders, right? And has since climbed to an even more top leadership position, whatever those might mean in the publishing industry. I don't actually know what that means her role is. Anyway, so we gave Tor an exclusive look after we finished the revision, even though we had 6+ other editors that hadn't responded to the initial submission. They offered on it. I signed a deal. Do we want to go into like deal size? Because I'm, mine's, I guess it's embarrassingly low, but it's not that big of a deal to me. Is it weird if I say what my deal size was?
it's totally up to you. I think.
Okay.
I mean, it's. I think we won't go into the numbers fully yet, but yeah, I think it
Yeah.
might be good for an overview. We can always cut it later if
Yep.
you think it's weird.
Okay, that's fine. So yeah, I signed a deal in June of 2017 was when I finally inked it. So it had been in the works for a month or two or three before that with Tor. But I signed a deal for a trilogy, and the advance was 30,000, so 10,000 per book. I had no idea, other than vague mentions of, oh, hey, this person signed a 6-figure deal for their debut at auction or whatever. I had no indication at that point in my publishing journey of what that meant to sign a deal that small, right? And to prospective authors, maybe that sounds pretty okay, right? Like it's not livable money and it's not life-changing money, but to get 10 grand per book versus 0 grand per book sounds pretty okay, right? At least that's what I thought at that time. And I thought, I didn't need the money at that point. I had thankfully some pretty solid success in my day job career, as had and has my wife. So we were doing well, and I thought, okay, this is my in. The big boss at Tor likes it. It's one of my favorite publishers. The Wheel of Time and many other, Ellie Modisette, a bunch of other books I had grown up loving were from Tor. So I was stoked. Uh, I'll try to be brief on the next portion, but my intended debut was to be in 2019, but they wanted me to write the next two books and have them all ready to go um, by 2019. And we said, okay, we'll try, but that was a mistake because A, I'm a slow writer. B, I had a very demanding job and a 2-year-old at that point, with a wife who had a demanding full-time job as well. So I did not come close to making that deadline. And so it was my fault that Rise of the Mages pushed from 2019 to 2020. But somewhere in there, they decided, yeah, fine, we don't need them all at once. We can just go to a normal publishing schedule, right? So it was then slated for 2020, and then the pandemic hit, and they had everybody was scrambling, and my book got pushed a year to 2021, which me and Matt felt was pretty okay by that point. It had already been however many years, so we
To be
got put.
honest, that's probably the nicest thing Tor has done for you, I think. I mean, in some ways, because like everyone I know who debuted in the pandemic,
Yeah,
bar like one or two people, just face planted, and it's not their fault. And to some extent, it's not entirely their publisher's fault either. I know that in some cases it was, but in a lot of cases, it's nobody was ready for that.
yep,
Um, and
yeah,
we'll go
that was
into
a
more into how your debut can affect the rest of your career, which is really, really fun. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, it was so fun. Yeah, that was a really fucking rough year. 2020 was a rough year, right? So I had tried to kind of form little author groups of my own. I met Clay, who's in our little group of friends, in 2018, 2019. I don't remember which year.
Author
Um,
of Flames of Mirror, says a background
yeah,
voice.
yeah. Clay Harmon, author of Flames of Mirror, which is an awesome book, by the way. And Clay is fantastic. I reached out to some other, tour debuts in 2020, and uh, my book was pushed soon thereafter. But I watched them go through debuting in 2020, and it was rough, like really, really rough, and so sad because their books are amazing. They're amazing authors, very dedicated, but they just absolutely got hosed. So yeah, anyway, I got pushed to 2021. I was supposed to be, I think at that point, September 2021. I have no idea why I got pushed again from 2021 to 2022, probably just publishing schedule or whatever. And at some point in there, I was supposed to go in trade paperback. That was kind of an experiment I think Tor was running, is releasing in trade paperback and all right next to each other. Book 1, 2, 3 in a span of 9 to 12 months. Anyway, I changed to a more traditional schedule of roughly a year between books, and they decided to go hardcover instead of trade paperback. And then I finally debuted in 2022, February 8th of 2022, which is really funny. That's a full almost 10 years after I started writing this same book, finally published in hardcover. And it's been almost a year since then, and a very interesting journey, but I think we can get into those details a little later. But that's, from beginning to published, that's my story.
It is a really long journey, to be fair. I think before you get into publishing, you don't know how long it takes to get books out the door. And now, when I see
Yeah.
books in bookshops, you kind of I kind of have this respect for them, like, oh, this book has been through about 1,000 different hoops just to be on the shelf for like 6 weeks and then get binned or whatever. Which is the fate most for books, isn't it? Though, like, that came out bleaker than I meant. Yeah, so I
Not
was going to say
you.
this. um, there are two things I want to throw in. The first is that Devi commented on my manuscript once, and she said, "I will never look at children the same way again," which is like the best compliment of my life. I can't remember the other one because my brain is like a sieve.
That's
Um,
funny.
Yeah, so I think it sounded almost kind of like Tor maybe was experimenting on you a little bit. They were trying different things. It probably is still really good. You didn't come out in 2020.
Yeah,
Um,
I think so too.
yeah,
2019 would have been okay, but that one was
yeah.
my own fault. Oh, I didn't mention in there that when I was acquired by Tor, I Davey was doing boss things, and so my book was given
Postings.
to, and I don't know what this process looked like, right? But in some form, was probably passed around internally, and I ended up with Jen Gunnels, who is my editor at Tor Books.
Yeah, I like to imagine in my head that basically all the editors stand in a circle and Devi just throws manuscripts at them, but that's probably not what happens, although that would be quite funny. um, yeah, and I guess, okay, I should probably start talking about mine at some point. So I'm also a Tor author. Oh yeah, that was my other funny story when the first time I ever met my editor on the phone. And she said, "So, have you read any books by Tor?" And it just floored me, this comment that she said, like, "Yeah, I grew up on Wheel of Time and Gene Wolfe and all that stuff." So, we're both Wheel of Time fans. For those who don't know us, which is like everyone, I'm a recovering Wheel of Time fan. I think Scott remains an addict, um, but we pray for him
Yeah,
daily.
yeah. Well, yeah. We can discuss Wheel of Time another day, but yeah, I
Yeah,
still it
that's
still
fine.
has a place in my heart. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I've written about my incredibly ridiculously ludicrously dramatic publishing journey before on my long-winded blog, where unfortunate people have sometimes stumbled across it. And basically, I didn't want to be a writer originally. I think when I was a kid and I was writing loads of Wheel of Time fan fiction, I had this brief idea when I was 12 that it'd be like the most amazing thing ever to be an author, and I thought this was genius. And then I think when I was about 13, I met some other people just online. Was like, oh wait, everyone wants to be an author. This is probably a really bad idea because everyone wants to do it and none of us will succeed. So, and also, I've got Chinese parents and stuff, and there's a real stigma against that kind of thing. I think I mentioned it a couple of times, and my parents were like, "But you don't write anything." So, anyway, I didn't write, and sometime when I was about 29 and I had a kid and no life, and we were kind of living in poverty and had been for a while. And I had a little bit of a midlife crisis about this, and decided I did want to write a book after all. And I wrote a horrible first book in about 4 months, and it was so, so bad. I couldn't find anyone to read it. My partner at the time read 200 words and he said, "Is it all like this? Because I want to stop already." And no, he's right. He's right, actually. His critiques about whatever else happened between us, his critiques about my work were spot on. Um, so I rewrote that book a lot over a year and kept trying to query it. I sent out some of the worst query letters this world has ever seen. I think I sent out one which said, "Imagine if like aliens landed on a fantasy planet and tried to start Plato's Republic," and that was like literally the query letter, and it was so bad. Uh, so we'll talk a little bit about agents and other things. This is not really for querying authors as such, but we'll do that another episode. I wrote a second book in about 7 months. I think I sacrificed a lot of health. I'm a slow writer as well. So I sacrificed a lot of health and like not having hobbies or free time to do that with kids and everything else going on. That book found me my agent, who is Naomi Davis. Naomi was at the time a very new agent, but had already taken on my critique partner, one of my critique partners. He's called Essa Hansen. So I knew that Naomi had a good reputation and was kind of doing the edit, would work with me and stuff. We went on submission, and that book didn't sell. And I remember one of the podcasts I used to listen to, I think it's called Shipping and Handling. They said that the day you sign with your agent is one of the best days of your writing career because you're just happy and you don't know all the shit that's coming ahead of you. And there's some truth to that. I thought I had it made. I had an agent. That was it. And
Yep.
yeah, then that book spent 18 months dying on submission, and I really
Oh.
struggled to write for a lot of that. I think in the first 6 months, I was just tired. I needed a break. And then it was like, I need to know what's going to happen with this book. And what happened with this book is that everybody rejected it. So um, some people had nice things to say, some people not so nice. I remember one editor said that it was pulpy and too actiony and like didn't have depth or something. Whatever. And then
Not that you remember that specific comment or that specific person
yeah,
at all,
he's keeping track.
huh?
And then I was talking to Naomi about the future, and she said, "Well, you've written contemporary fantasy, contemporary adult fantasy, which is a hard sell at the time. That was back when YA was everything, and no one was writing adult." And
Yeah.
Naomi said, "Well, if you've got a few different ideas, epic fantasy is always a good market. It's reliable." So I tried to write an epic fantasy, and after I think 4 months, I realized this was not working, and I wasn't interested. So I told Naomi I was going to go back and write another idea I had, which turned into the Book Eaters. At the time, it was called Paper Flesh, and it was another contemporary adult fantasy slash urban fantasy. But Naomi was supportive of that, so they liked the idea. I took a long time to finish that book because my life was falling apart a little bit without being making it sound like a sob story. And the end result of that is eventually I moved out kind of at the early bit of lockdown from my ex-husband's house with this unfinished manuscript and no money, and finished that book and sent it to my agent and said, "I'm really sorry, this book's a hot mess and I don't know how to fix it." And they were like, "No, I'm really excited, really excited." And they sent it off, and I thought, okay, while that's going on, eventually lockdown will lift in a bit and I can go and like retrain because I've been out of work 9 years or something ridiculous. I'll retrain, find something else to do. I know submission will take a year or longer because it's COVID, everything's slow. Naomi's warned me advances have gone down since COVID. More on advances in another episode. And that didn't happen. So I had that first very bad submission experience, and Book Eaters went a different way. We were preempted by Tor in 4 days, which I almost had a heart attack. I think I was sitting on the couch watching TV with my then boyfriend, new boyfriend, and Naomi sent me a text on Twitter and on Facebook and like my email, like, "Can we get a call? Can we get a call? Can we get a call?" And the end result of that is that Lindsay Hall, who's my editor, had wanted to buy this book, and she'd read it overnight. She'd made her team read it the next day, and then they'd gone to acquisitions and they'd come back with an offer. And if you don't know how these things work, preempts are basically where a publisher comes to you and says, "We're going to try and buy you out to prevent an auction happening." Um, I guess I'll go into this a bit now, but basically, my agent trusts Lindsay as an editor. So I hadn't talked to her or anything, didn't know her. And she said, "This is the right deal for you and we should accept it." And part of that reasoning is Tor has the deepest pockets of our genre. So if we go to an auction, they'll probably still win, but we'll piss them off and we might get less money in the end. And this
Hmm.
just saves a lot of time. So we accepted that preempt, and it came to 300,000 US dollars for 3 books. I couldn't sleep for about 2 days, and I couldn't do an editor call because I was just like, Lindsay offered to call the after the deal closed, and I said, "Naomi, I can't speak to her right now." Um, and my partner had bought like prosecco or something to celebrate going on submission, because he was always supportive, even though I hadn't made any money, and I always thought that's funny that he called it work and stuff. But anyway, we ended up drinking it to celebrate the book deal, and then yeah, uh, my I think after 10 ridiculous months where I rewrote a third of that book and we did a ton of edits, it eventually came out 2 years after being acquired, August 2022. And I've also had an interesting year. I've gone on really long now, so I'm going to stop.
No, not at all. That
Oh no,
that's
I'll go into how I met you actually, because I hope this doesn't make you feel bad. So I was trying to make no, I was trying to make
can't wait
friends
for
with
this.
other I was trying to make friends with other tour debuts, and I found it because my critique partner, who's with Orbit was kind of like it gets its debut authors together and they put them together in like a group and they all get to new Orbit voices. Tor doesn't have very many debuts. There were not very many of us. And so I was trying to get to know some of the Tor authors, and they already all sort of paired off in their own clique, which is fine. Like they've got their own groups and things, and they didn't really want to know. And basically, Scott was like the first Tor author I found who's coming out of my year and who was happy to talk to me. I was like, okay, that's cool. And then I looked him up on Edelweiss, and by then I'd learned quite a lot about what was going on with my deal and what it meant. Because when someone hands you a lot of money, you start researching, or you should. And I kind of looked at his page on Edelweiss. I thought, shit, they're going to screw him over. And like I sent it to another friend of mine. I said, I think they're going to screw this author over. And they're like, yeah, he's going to get screwed. Um, and I think, no, man, I'm so sorry, dude. I think I just have this terrible author's guilt. Like,
No, you shouldn't.
I,
You absolutely shouldn't. That's so funny, though.
because I became aware very quickly over that summer that my book had been picked for success, and I was happy about that, but also it's kind of not fair on books that aren't picked for success. So I was very aware of that. Um, but anyway, it didn't matter to me. I was just like happy to have writing friends, and yeah, I don't know, started reconnecting with people and chatting to people. And actually, I think I met Clay through Scott, and then discovered I had already met Clay years ago on Absolute Right,
Mm.
where I critiqued an early version of his manuscript, which is now a book. And now we kind of have a little Discord group together, and we share information, and we try and talk about things going on in publishing really openly and honestly, and to keep our feet grounded, because I do see people get swept away at the high end. Like lead titles talk to lead titles, and mid list talk to mid list, and there's not always cross pollination between those groups. So I guess the first lesson of today's episode is, we both kind of went into this more or less. We had our advantages and disadvantages in life, but publishing decided your book goes here, your book goes there. Um, if you're not aware of it, that is a thing. There's lead titles and there's mid list, and we ended up on different sides of that fence. So,
Yeah, yeah, and to be to be clear, in in 2020, watching, and then in 2021, really even too, watching some releases, some debuts go one way, and
mm,
some go a very different way. Um, uh, really started to open my eyes to, hey, something's not clear here. Some of the things are being hidden from me and everyone, and I don't understand what's going on. So I was really desperately looking for people who
mm.
would talk to me and who would be real, and tell me what's going on. So I consider myself very fortunate for having connected with you, and you being willing to dumpster dive in terms of uh, writing friendships.
No, what's that saying?
um,
You need to be nice to people on your way up because you see them on your way down. I mean, that's the other
yeah,
side of
no,
publishing. You can be a lead title one year, and you can be out in your ass the next year. Stay humble,
yeah,
folks.
yeah.
Otherwise,
It
life comes at you
really,
fast.
yeah, it really is an absolutely brutal industry. And we have quite a few episodes planned where I think that will become more obvious, right? But one note I wanted to make is that the discrepancy there between me signing a $30,000 deal and Sunyi signing a $300,000 deal, there are very real factors that went into that, right? So Lindsay at Tor obviously thought the Book Eaters was good enough that other people were going to offer on it, and they wanted to put a significant amount of money on the table to lock not just the Book Eaters down, but lock Sunyi down for three
Mm.
books, right? So I mean, she being Sunyi, did something very, very right in terms of writing a fantastic book. And The Book Eaters is a fantastic book. So it's not like it's just random, right?
It's not a
I
lottery,
Yeah,
but yeah, but
but
it kind
the
of is.
ran yeah, the
Go on.
randomness is that or where potentially a very good book could still get screwed, or a very bad book could still get picked up for a lot of money, is that, you're, I don't remember your number of how many editors Naomi subbed to, but I remember it was more than mine. But my book was only subbed to 9 people, right? Um, 9 acquiring editors. So you have to impress and have a perfect match of interests, of style, of catching that editor when they have a budget, when they have an opening in their schedule, whatever else. With 9 people, like, that's
No, I
ridiculous.
think it's about 8 to 10 editors, depending on who's away or on mat leave
Yeah,
or on vacation or whatever. There's 8 to 10 editors in our genre, which is adult sci-fi and fantasy. When you run out of them to sub to, you're out of the big five and you're looking elsewhere, which can work. You know, there are really good publishers like Rebellion is quite a good press, for example. They have a shed load of money. I think when we talk about smaller presses, you have to understand that even smaller presses, you being the listeners, not Scott, smaller presses can still be pretty big. It's just that the big presses are vast, heaving behemoths of corporations
yeah,
that are even bigger.
yep, yeah. I think, knowing what I do now, obviously you want to take a shot at signing a huge deal with a huge publisher, but I don't think I would hesitate at signing a good deal with a non Big Five, as long as they had a pretty solid track record, like,
Yeah.
Rebellion, Titan, whoever. Um,
Yeah, I guess that's the first part, really, is that when you're looking at your career, money does matter, I think.
yeah,
And
hmm
you can get stuff like sometimes there will be reasons to accept a smaller deal. Um, for me, when I was doing the calculations, like when I went on sub, I was living basically on the dole, which is you call them social security in the States, we call them benefits here. And there was a point where it's like this weird median number where if I'd gotten between, I can't remember the number, but like between 10 and 20 grand of a book advance, it would have done nothing except take me off the dole for a year.
yeah, yep,
Where I was kind of thinking, if I get that, I'd have to think about whether I actually take it, whether it's worth the time.
yeah, hmm
Um, yeah, so I mean, you hear people say things like, "Oh, there can be downsides to a big deal," and I think actually, I don't think so.
I
I
don't think
think
so either.
I think if someone gives you a big check, you take that money and you run to your bank as fast as your little feet can carry you, and you cash it, and that is money in the bank that they cannot take off you.
Yeah,
Because anything can go wrong. Anything can go wrong if whether they give you $10 or 10 million. But one of these ways, you've got 10 million.
yeah. Well, and it's not just that, right? And to be clear, I'm specifically
Yeah.
talking about if I had, if I had at a non Big Five but still a very established publisher, if I had a similar deal offered there versus at a bigger publisher, I now understand that if that came with significantly more enthusiasm, what have you, at the non
Mm.
Big Five, that there's a discussion to be had there between one and the other. Now,
It's maybe
the
percentage of
question,
the publisher. Because like some
yeah,
publishers can offer less, but if what they're offering is a lot for what they usually offer, then that means they're throwing their weight behind it.
yeah,
So I think like orbit advances tend to be a bit lower, but if they so like orbit lead titles will probably have an advance. It's a bit less than Tor lead titles, but you're better off being an orbit lead than a Tor mid list, for example.
bingo, bingo, yep. And yet another question that you raised is it worth signing a small deal with these bigger publishers, or any of these publishers? A small deal being roughly what I got. Um, and that's a discussion to be had. Lot goes into that. It's something that I've thought about a lot. And in my situation, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would have, if I knew what I back then, what I do now. I'm not sure I signed that deal, right?
Mm.
Because what you're talking about is very real. You've got money in the bank, but what that means from their side, right? And we've talked about this a bit, and I think we'll definitely go into this in future episodes. But what that means for them is that they then have to work a lot harder
Yes.
on your book and for your book to earn that money back that they just
And
handed
boy,
you.
do they work at
Yeah.
it. I
Yes.
mean, people say publishers don't market. The heck they do. They may not have marketed all the books on their list, but when they choose to, they can throw the kitchen sink. They can throw a warehouse of kitchen sinks at a book to make it
Yeah.
float. It doesn't always
Yep.
succeed, but it's much more likely to.
Yeah, and it's not always visible. That's the big thing.
Yes.
It's,
I think, yeah, there's so much. I think people forget publishers can't sell directly to readers. And that's why they're not there on street corners with flyers saying, buy Rise of Mages, because that doesn't work for them. That all their entire business model is flogging it to stores and, well, I won't say their entire business model, but to like stores, libraries, booksellers, blah, 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 corporate buys, the big pieces behind business to business purchases. So, um, but yeah, I guess we should probably pick a point to stop there. And I was going to
yeah.
ask this last question, which is, do you think the experience so far is worthwhile?
Oh. um, God Almighty, a lot goes into that, right? And I've
Mm,
actually thought a lot about that over the last few years, just because of how my publishing journey has gone. Right, you know, my
mm,
my debut launch certainly didn't go quite how I hoped it would. Um, so there's a lot of reasons to be negative about having spent the time and effort and put the hope into this industry and this career. But overall, where I'm at, I'm happier than I've ever been. You know, I have a very, very good home life and things are comfortable there. So I have the privilege of being okay with that kind of
mm.
shit outcome, right? And not
Yeah,
everybody has that. So
yeah.
I certainly wouldn't recommend my journey for most people. Uh, but for me, I do have a book that I love in Rise of the Mages on shelves. And, you know, more in the trilogy coming. And I've acquired skills and friends that I value very highly. So writing and the publishing industry are still very important to me, and I still have a lot of optimism for the future. So yeah, I mean, I think for me it's very worth it, but would I recommend somebody make the choices that I made? Probably not.
The real friends were the rejections we got along the way.
In this case,
Uh,
the real friends were the real friends I made along the way, right? Like, yeah, there's
yeah,
some pretty amazing people uh, in the industry that I've been fortunate to connect with. But yeah, I mean, I would ask the same back to you, but I think that's pretty clear, right? Like I think
it
you're
is. But I guess because we're going to get into so much negative stuff, I will say that book deal completely changed my life. Like a year on, oh my god, we were living in the shittest place on Leeds, I swear. And now, like, I don't have an amazing house, but I have a house that functions and it's fine, and the kids live in it, and I have a car and I can drive. And for now, I live off my writing and can still look after the kids and all that jazz. So, yeah, for me, it was life changing. I'll do a money breakdown sometime of what it's like to live off that amount because you're not actually just rolling in money. As fun as that would sound, for one thing, everything gets cut up, and also taxes are a thing, and double taxes are a thing. But
yep.
I'm very lucky, and I'm not complaining. And it didn't feel worth it when I was dying on submission, but it felt worth it now. So who knows? Maybe in a year's time, I'll be like, no, it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. It, I don't know, caused the end of the world somehow. But for now, yeah.
I, for
Um,
one, strongly believe that you will be around in this industry for a very, very long time.
I hope so. Mostly because I'm committed now, right? I can't do anything else other than be housewife. So it's housewife or it's books, and the kids are
Well,
growing up. So
I'm now in the house husband or books life, so I get it. I totally get it.
yeah.